Thank you so much for having me today. My name is Emilie Schario, and I'm really excited to be talking to you about the jobs to be done of modern data teams. Before I dive in, let me tell you a little bit about myself. First, as I said, my name is Emilie Schario. My pronouns are she, her. I'm currently a data strategist in residence at Amplify Partners, a seed stage venture capital firm focused on technical founders. Prior to this, I was director of data at Netlify. And prior to that, I was at GitLab, where I was the first data analyst, watched the company grow from 250 to over 1,300 people. And I like to tweet things at Emilie Schario. So I hope that we start a conversation here today and we can keep the conversation going. First, a little bit about our agenda. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I once took a job outside of data and how that shaped how I think about data. We'll talk about the modern data stack and how it's evolving, the purpose of a data team, the types of work your data team does, and how tooling has enabled us to get better at that work. So let's go ahead and dive in, shall we? So first, how a career detour changed how I thought about data. I mentioned earlier that I did a lot of different things at GitLab. When I joined the company, we were about 250 people. And by the time I left, we were over 1,300. And the thing about working at a company that's growing that quickly is that your job just kind of is constantly evolving as the company is evolving. And about a year and a half in, I got the opportunity to move into interim chief of staff role. And so I say that in this role, my skill went from data as my hammer to data as, or instead of data being my job, data went to being a tool into how I did my job. And I think about this a lot in the framework of how I think and lead and grow data teams. After that job, I moved back into data where I led the data organization at Amplify. So I think this is important because when we think about how we fit data organizations within the bigger context of the company, we have to think about how the data team is working with other parts of the company, but also how we're driving impact collectively. So when I first started my career in the modern data stack, this is kind of what infrastructure looked like. You had your off-the-shelf ETL tools and really it was just Stitch and Fivetran, maybe a Luma back in the day. And your data warehouse, you had Redshift probably, maybe Snowflake or BigQuery if you were cutting edge. Data came in, dbt allowed us to adopt the paradigm of ELT. And then your data was pretty much accessible in BI tools. Occasionally you had someone whose preferred mechanism was an R script that they wrote or a Jupyter notebook. And so they would query the data warehouse directly. But most often, the way that your company interacted with data was pretty cut and dry through BI tools like ModeLooker and Periscope. But today, the data infrastructure looks so different. So this is from a great blog post from Andreessen Horowitz, from Matt Bornstein, Jennifer Lee, and Martin Casado, where they talk about how data infrastructure is changing. And I won't steal their thunder here. The thing you'll note is there's a lot more tooling here. And this is just categories of tooling. If you prefer, we could look at it in Matt Turk's diagram and see the number and the sheer volume of data tools that exist today. And it's without a doubt that there has been an incredible explosion of tooling. So I think this stuff is cool, don't get me wrong, but it is very easy to talk about tooling and forget what we're here for in the first place. So let's get back to it. What is the purpose of a data team? Take a second here. If you've got pen and paper nearby, scribble something down. But if not, just think about it. Do you have an answer? I say it's to help organizations make better decisions. And so When I led the data team at Netlify, this was our mission. The data team exists to empower the entire organization to make the best decisions possible by providing accurate, timely, and useful insights. You know, it's not here. Really cool infrastructure tooling. Huh. Let's read that one more time. The data team exists to empower the entire organization to make the best decisions possible by providing accurate, timely, and useful insights. And so when I think about the best way to think about, or when I think about the best way to lay out how we do this, I like the jobs to be done framework. There's a couple parts to here. I won't read the whole thing, but the thing to know is that the whole point of jobs to be done, or JTBD, is to understand the problem you're trying to solve before building the requested solution. So the quote that people like to point to here, excuse me, is Henry Ford's quote around, if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. Now, there's some question about whether Henry Ford actually said that quote at all, and that's a discussion for another time. But what I will say is that that is the sentiment that captures the jobs to be done framework. So I've written about this before. If you look for run your data team like a product team on Locally Optimistic, you'll find a blog post by me and my GitLab colleague, Taylor Murphy, who's currently head of product at Meltano. And in this blog post, we talk about how when we as data practitioners interact with the business, it's important that we not just fetch numbers for people, but we understand the problems that people are trying to solve. And people mostly agree. Nobody seems to say like, no, that seems way off. I have no idea what you're talking about. People agree, this makes sense. But the reality is that it's still hard to take that theory and concept and implement it in a tactical method. So, excuse me, that's what we're going to talk about today. What do these jobs to be done actually look like? What does running your data as a product team mean in practice? What are the problems that you solve for your business? So here are some problems that the data teams often hear. Marketing Molly here says she wants to be able to segment her email campaigns based on product interactions. Product manager Pam says she wants to know if opening this link in a new tab will lead to higher bookings. Finance Felicia is frustrated that the board meeting snuck up on her for the third time this year, and they're debating the definition of revenue again. And then executive Erin doesn't know what she doesn't know and doesn't know what questions to ask. And all of these problems, for many years, all we had was BI. And so that was the hammer that we took to solve all these and to address all these problems. But my argument today is that the jobs to be done of the modern data stack is these 5 workloads. And the tooling is a result of the identification of these 5 workloads. So we'll dive into what each of these are, but the 5 jobs to be done of the modern data stack, and thus of the modern data team, are data activation, metrics management, insight discovery, experimentation analysis, and servicing other people. Let's go through these together. Before we do, I want to call out that there are other things your data team has to do. So managing Snowflake permissions, building out core entity dimensions or entities and dimensions, setting OKRs for your company, hiring and firing, managing people. Those are all things that your data team has to do. They take up some portion of your time, but they're not the jobs to be done of the data team. So I like to think of this work as enablement work. Now, whether it's enabling individual team members, enabling other team members outside of the data org, enabling something else is a little different. But today, what we're talking about in this context is specific to how we drive impact to the business directly. And that's what the jobs to be done framework, as it's applied here, is meant to capture. So first, data activation. This is solving Marketing Molly's pain point around email segmentation. And the goal of data activation, if you're moving data from one system into another, is to increase access to data across the company. So if you have defined a customer propensity to convert score in your data warehouse that's built off a lead scoring model or something similar, and that data only exists in your data warehouse where it's not available to your sales team or your rep ops team, well, does it exist at all? It's one of those tree falls in the woods. Is anyone there to hear it sorts of questions. Next, metrics management. So finance Felicia's pain point. But really what we see is that companies often spend a significant amount of time asking for metrics that already exist or have already been defined, or reconciling metrics that different parts of the organization are defining in different ways. And a go-to example that I like to use here is an organization where they were direct-to-consumer e-commerce, and the business defined revenue as, revenue on the last day of the calendar month, but they also considered it as net revenue. So if a customer had a refund, they would remove that amount from the total. So there was always like a 1-week window after the close of business where, or after the close of the month, where numbers could change a little bit, because that was your refund window. But marketing, well, they optimized for top line revenue. They didn't actually care about net revenue. And so every quarter or every month as they were prepping these numbers, marketing and sales always had to understand where the disconnect in their numbers were. So one's not more right than the other, but you need a system and a process for handling how to define and manage metrics in your organization. And metrics have two parts. There's the code and the plain language definition. Next are data insights. So finding things in the data that people aren't actively asking questions on. There's a great blog post by Paige Berry on Locally Optimistic on sharing insights with your organization. I'd strongly recommend giving that a read to see more about what that looks like in practice. But it's the responsibility of your data team to discover and push information to the business that nobody's asking for. Next, experimentation analysis or driving experimentation. So we have here the example of product manager Pam, but experimentation in general is something that your data team is often going to be responsible for. In my experience, an understanding of statistics, confidence intervals, p-values is required unless you're using an off-the-shelf tool like EPO. So being able to drive business impact through experimentation is a really measurable way for your data team to impact the business. And finally, last but certainly not least, is servicing other people. So the data team is responsible for helping other team members get the information they need with the data. And in some ways, the way I like to think of this is that the rest of the company needs the data team to be the interface for the data. Some people will try and use self-serve BI tools and drag and drop and slice and dice in Excel, and then they'll hit a wall and they'll come to the data team. And it's our responsibility as data practitioners to help solve that gap. And so, sure, it would be great if the tools did this for us, but at some point, we just have to accept that we are the interface to that data. And so what this means when we put it all together is that we were trying to solve all of these problems for a long time. And the only solution we had was BI. Marketing Molly's example that I mentioned in the beginning, where she wanted to be able to segment email campaigns based on product interactions. In a previous life, the way we did this was we had a mode dashboard that refreshed once a week that had the people who got the new targeted campaign. And Marketing Molly would have to download the CSV and upload it to her email marketing tool. So before, all we had was a hammer. But today, we have a whole toolkit full of dedicated tools that can help us solve these problems. And maybe this graphic is familiar to you, but if you're not, what we have is a bunch of dedicated tools here a boombox and a camera and some other things. And they all consolidated into the iPhone. And so when I talk about this, inevitably I get the follow-up question of, well, Emilie, does that mean we're going to see consolidation in the data stack? I don't know. I don't really care. Because my theory is that we are still in the cassette phase of data teams. There's still so much more that we can do. It's hard to even imagine what the Walkman looks like. If we think about the technology adoption life cycle, we still have to cross the chasm. Tooling that seems normal or commonplace in startup land is still foreign to so many more companies. And so there's a lot more to do here. But the thing that I'd like you to take away is that the explosion of tools is a byproduct of a deeper understanding of the jobs to be done. In other words, the tooling is a result of understanding how data teams can better impact the business. And where does analytics engineering fit into all of this? I say that it's the enablement work that I mentioned earlier. So enablement and foundational work through analytics engineering drives impact to your team, managing warehouse permissions as code, building core data models, making improvements to CI. And what is analytics engineering but bringing the best practices of software development to our analytics workflows? So yes, this is all made possible by analytics engineering. All right, one final summary slide here if you're looking for some examples of what tooling can look like. Otherwise, I'm going to be hanging out in the chat for the next bit. I look forward to continuing the conversation and answering your questions. Chat soon.